Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 253. I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast today by the head of strength and IDP at Huddersfield Town, Callum Adams. Callum, how are we?
I am excellent, to be fair. What day is it? Thursday afternoon. So yeah, I'm getting closer to the game. It always gets more exciting when you get closer to the game. So I'm pretty good, yeah.
Well, it's very good to have you on, mate. You said before this is your first podcast that you've done. I'm not quite sure how. I don't know how no one's had you on a podcast. I don't know how we've not had you on the podcast yet. But thank you for coming on.
I think people don't enjoy listening to me, maybe. I don't know.
That's definitely not true. Definitely not true. Cal, just give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Okay, yeah. So how did I start in the game? So I went to obviously university and I studied exercise science. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. My dad at the time was pushing me towards NHS, and I just didn't want to do it. It wasn't what got me going, if you like. And then I got an opportunity to volunteer at Huddersfield Giants rugby club and Huddersfield Town at the time, just doing little bits of like testing and stuff like that in the lab. And then there was a part-time internship or a volunteer role going that I interviewed for under Darren Robinson at the time in terms of head of sports science, and interviewed for that. Got it quite late on in the season because they had a few complications. And yeah, so I just did little bits of like physical profiling and stuff like that once a week. And then I actually got a role at Brentford Football Club for a short period of time. But then I was offered in the same week an internship here, which, being a northern guy, well, Midlands guy, but more northern guy, I took the opportunity to stay up here, and I did an internship for the first season, actually as a sports scientist, technically, or GPS analyst. So I got into the field. My interest was always strength conditioning, but at the time it was like, well, I want to get into football. So I took the role as GPS analyst, did a solid year of GPS analyst, got really good at Excel in that time. Excel before that was just doing a few sums, if you like. And then after that year, I think I got pretty good at it. Then I got offered a full-time role in 2015-16. So that was 14 and 15 as an intern. And then 15 and 16 full-time role, which was very much still just a GPS analyst, if you like, as a GPS analyst. What it did allow me to do, though, was understand the game more in terms of behind and what the demands are of the game. So I actually really enjoyed that period of time. As the years went on, so maybe the first 3 or 4 years, I developed from like almost like a GPS analyst to an all-rounder, if you like, as they call him, or a generalist. Started doing bits in the gym, stuff like that. And then, roughly 3 years ago, so just after COVID, obviously there was a few changes at the club and that sort of stuff. And my passion started, well, it already was there, but I started to really get into my own in terms of the strength conditioning or the gym stuff. And then the director of football at the time really liked my work and offered me my current role of head of strength and IDP, which I was doing little bits of it prior to being officially offered the role, if you like. But it then almost became official within the structure of the department, if you like. And so yeah, I've been doing this role officially for the last 3 seasons now. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome, mate. So we are approaching 10 years? 10 years at the club?
This is actually, so yeah, this is the start of my 10th season, technically, yeah. We've obviously 1 year as an intern right at the start, but at this club, yeah, my 10th full season.
Awesome. So naturally, with any club across that time, you're going to have worked with, a number of players, a large number of players, but also a number of coaches, head coaches, managers, with many, many different styles across that time. So when you've experienced those changes, how has that impacted you in your practice?
So yeah, I mean, on that, obviously back in, when was it? I did the conference with yourself. We spoke about this a little bit in terms of how many coaches I've worked under. If it was around 7 or 8, I forget the number sometimes. 7 or 8, and within that, I've had English philosophies, if you like, and also European philosophies, in particular German and Spanish. Obviously under Wagner and Carlos, very different. Obviously, you hear a lot about it anyway. The English game is becoming more and more European as we speak, if you like. The differences for me, obviously, are the biggest difference is the periodization of the week leading to games. Obviously, in the Championship, we have 2-game weeks quite regular. So that's your Saturday, Tuesday, Saturdays. But when it is a 1-game week, the periodization is the biggest difference I've seen in between English and European periodization, if you like. And they both offer challenges, they both offer pros, and they both offer challenges. In terms of, I guess, my remit, in terms of my work, again, they'll both offer pros and cons. I do prefer the European style in terms of my work, so I get the more opportunities, more contact times with the players in terms of times to be able to work with them as such. But what I haven't really enjoyed is adapting to the English style as well, and having that extra day in the middle of the week off, and then how does that impact the players' work at the start of the week compared to the end of the week? And yeah, so the biggest difference for me is the periodization and being able to make sure the players get the same work in, but in a different way.
We're going to go into that work in a little bit and how that's changed throughout your time at the club as well, because I think that'd be really interesting. But obviously, in that period of time, the club have been Championship, but they've been up to the Premier League as well. Yep. So what's been the biggest difference in terms of the Premier League schedule, Championship schedule, which has impacted you and your work?
Yeah, I think at the time, obviously in the Premier League, and not being a team in the Premier League that has any further domestic further competitions like Europa League, etc., you actually get more time with the players. So there's a lot more 1-game weeks, if you like, than there is 2-game weeks. So when people ask me about that, whether it's players that come into the club now or staff, it's always the same messages. Well, you actually get more time to work with the players. You generally get to train them more and harder, because you play on a Saturday or Sunday, depending on TV, or Friday. But generally, the next game is at least between 6 and 9 days apart. Very rarely 9, but most of the time 6 or 7 days apart, because you're playing on a Saturday, then maybe a Sunday or Saturday to Saturday. So you get more contact time in terms of physical work, if you like, which then obviously correlates with the coach having more technical time, more tactical time, more off-field coaching as well. Whereas in the Championship, yes, there is a lot of 1-game weeks. Obviously, last season was challenging again in itself with the World Cup involved. But yeah, in the Championship, it's very much double-game weeks quite often, and having to look at not just the weeks, but the mesocycles, and how much work can you get in this 6 weeks, and then also the next 6 weeks, because actually this mesocycle has got 4 double-game weeks, but the next one's only got 1. So that's always the biggest challenge in the Championship. But yeah, they're the biggest differences. You can get more work into the Premier League schedule, if you like.
I think it'd be good to dive into some details now on the actual way that you go into your programming, and what would be good is to look at those differences from Premier League to Championship. But just before we do that, I just wanted to ask around your approach and how it's differed, how it's transitioned across your short career so far. Like, what's the main changes that you see that you've made?
It's an interesting question, because I'm very interested in psychology. I don't actually have any technically psychology degrees, if you like, or qualifications, but the biggest difference is how you get that message across to the players and the buy-in. When you're trying to program strength and conditioning for the play, a lot of footballers don't really enjoy it. Not all, some love it, and there is more and more nowadays. But I've lost track there. Sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, just how things have transitioned for yourself in terms of like the.
So at the beginning of my career, if you like, in the period of time, I was a lot more careful, if you like. That's probably the easiest way to say it. What's the minimal risk I can take, but get work into them? Because you're dealing with giving the players minimal risk at this, in my old philosophy or my old beliefs, if you like, but also dealing with players that really want to work and they question, are we doing enough? But I was really, I guess the best way to say, at the time, I was really nervous and scared to injure players, not be available, and the coaches won't be happy because this player's not performing in training or whatever. So I'd always go on the side of caution. I think the biggest change I've had is I'm less like that now. Players want to work. players want to be challenged. Players want sessions to feel hard. Obviously, periodization has to be right, so not every single session is hard. But when it's right to hit them hard, I enjoy making sure they're getting the right intensities, whether that's lifting or conditioning. So that's where I've differed from my beginning, if you like, of my story or my career, to now where it's almost like, how much work can I do with the players, and is it the right work, and are they doing it right, rather than ticking a box, is probably my honest answer. So that's been the biggest change for me as a coach, if you like, strength coach.
Do you think that's been a natural progression as well, Cal, for the industry as a whole, when the demands of games have started to creep up as well, though? So we start understanding even more that players have to be robust enough, fit enough, strong enough to deal with these modern day demands.
Yeah, I mean, the game it's changing. Every single, I mean, obviously this year's a massive discussion around the extra time and how much more volume the players are going to get. But if we take that away for a little bit, because it's only been 2 or 3 games, the game is the players are doing more distance in the same period of time, if you like, and they're also doing more explosive or high intense distance in the same period of time. The players are just footballers are becoming better athletes, and especially even 5-6 years ago, your Premier League was your absolute elite, not just technically, but your elite physical athletes. And then as you went down the leagues, it kind of went with the leagues, if you like. That physically, it got a lot not as good the lower you went down. Whereas I think now, all the way from I've worked with players that have maybe moved down to League 2 or National League, and there's not much difference now. There is, but there's not a big difference. And I think the best way to describe that from me would be when I came in as a GPS analyst, I had 9 units, catapult at the time. I had 9 units, and I had, obviously, there's 11 players on a football pitch, and obviously within a squad there's a lot more than 11. So I had to choose certain positions on certain days and make sure each position's got one, and this player's got one, to monitoring him for return to play. Obviously now we've got a unit for every player in the club, including academy, and then we've played against National League sides and non-league sides in pre-season, and they all have GPS. So that just shows that the game, that in itself for me shows that the game is adapted physically, because the lower you go down in leagues, the same work's being done, maybe with less men and less manpower, but the same work's being done. It's just where the game's going, and players care now. They want to push on for they also care, but they also see that their neighbour and the person next to them is doing it as well. So I think it's exciting for football fans, if you like, or even sport fans, because it's cross sport. But for football fans, it's exciting because the game becomes quicker, faster, and more goals and all that sort of stuff. The fitter players are, the better decision making's made in later in games. So you're probably getting, without looking at research on that, you're probably getting better end to games and more goals. And yeah, so I just think the game's getting much more exciting because of the physical side is getting better and better. So
you said before about the sort of buy-in or buy-in from players. Does it make that sell to players easier now, or do you think that's just from a culture of players are getting used to having a gym program?
Believe it or not, I mean, well, I know you'll know this, but one of the biggest challenges now is that players have their own, I think, their own nutritionists and fitness coaches, etc. That was set by, well, the most famous player was Ronaldo when he first came to Man United, and he had his own team behind him. And then obviously a lot of the Premier League sides with the money, players with the money they have, it's more fundable, if you like. You see that at all levels now. I see that with National League play. I know a few players that have played here and have played National League recently. They have external coaches. So one of the biggest challenges sometimes is actually reining the players in and not doing too much. And that's where, I mean, not to go too much into it right now, but in terms of the IDP role, I had to adapt a little bit, and that's another area I've changed. Not get offended is probably the best way. That I have to manage 25 plus players, at one point more than that, because I had another team as well in terms of the academy. And as good as I may think my programming is, if I'm not always giving a player one-to-one attention, they may feel they're not getting enough. So they go seek a one-to-one because they feel they're working harder because somebody's giving them face-to-face attention for 45 minutes to an hour. You don't get that with one man to 20 or 25. So one of the biggest challenges sometimes realizing, because you may see a player maybe shirking it a little bit and not doing everything, and you think, why is that? Dig a little bit deeper. Oh, I've got a session tonight with so-and-so. okay, but you need to let us know that, because not just because we need to know why you're doing it, but also what you're doing. Because if you're doing, that's for the ease of this conversation, if you're doing that certain lift in the evening, but you're also doing it with me in the morning, this intensity and that intensity in the evening, then what are you actually getting out of it? And actually, are you increasing your risk of injury, even though you're trying to reduce it? So that's actually been one of the biggest challenges in my role for the last 3 years, that it's just becoming more and more prevalent. I don't actually begrudge it too much. I actually quite encourage it, and I quite like the collaboration of it, if you like. Because if what I'm here to try and do is actually get the best out of the players physically. If psychologically they feel they're going to do this X, Y, and Z better away from the club, then okay. But let's work together and let's have a conversation with this coach. And yeah, that's, I think, a challenge that a lot of people in my position or similar will face. But I think my best, if I'm giving advice on this sort of conversation, would be actually be open-minded with it. Because it's also quite exciting, because you can network and learn as well. But yeah, that is a challenge that I think even the fans, if you like, will see that players do work externally. They see it on Instagram, they see it on social media, and they may even question, well, hang on, does he not play for so and so? And why is it? Yeah, some may not. Some may just see it as that's the norm. It is. It's not far off the norm now. And like I say, that's from the Premier League all the way down to the National League, and dare I say it, even lower. So
yeah,
probably more, even more probably lower, because there'll be less staff. But yeah.
I think the big point, isn't it, is the transparency from both sides.
Yep.
And that's where you just said, like, those relationships are absolutely crucial between the private coach and the club, or a representative of the club, just so people know what's going on both sides. I think that's the key, isn't it? And that's probably where lines are getting very blurred with certain instances like that, because, like you say, things are just getting repeated. Players then become at higher risk, and that's where it becomes a real issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what happens was, in terms of the IDP role side of my role, if you like, this is where it comes in as like a bit of a psychological role as well. And we have a psychologist that works with us, the staff, if you like, indirectly to then work with the players. And it's knowing each player, and if certain players, for example, will not tell you what they're doing outside the club. Fortunately, I think one of my strengths is being quite observant. I can tell when players change, and when I spend a lot of time with the players. I'm the first person they work with every single day. A lot of them confide in me and tell me stuff and don't tell me stuff, and I can tell when behaviours change. So certain players, you know that potentially something's going on here, so you talk to them, and that's when they then tell you. And I think if you push back on that, you've got more risk of them hiding it even more, and then it could cause problems down the line. A lot of the time, it never happens in the instant. So for the first 1, 2, maybe a month, they're doing these double sessions or triple sessions in a day or a week or whatever, and nothing comes of it. But it's later down the line, it's the chronic effects that could become a problem, and it's helping the players understand that is another part of my role as an S&C coach in a first team football environment, if you like. Is actually, like you say, the collaboration, because it's really important, and it's almost allowing them to be in a safe space to open up to me and be like, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is why. And sometimes the why isn't because they don't feel they're getting enough from me. Sometimes the why is, I put it out there, the agents, all that sort of stuff comes into play. So there's a hell of a lot of considerations to be considered, and that's the biggest challenge. That's where I'd say my role is. I'm a strength and IDV coach as official, but I do believe I'm also a psychologist at times, and having to deal with that side of things. And I do believe the same program that I could program can be delivered in a really bad way, whether that's the actual delivery of the content or the way I coach it, or it can be delivered in a really good way, and that it'll be the same program, but that's the difference between it being elite and not being so elite, if you like, is how you manage the human. So that's my biggest learning from the last 10 years, to link to the question you asked earlier, is I could do the same program for the next 10 years and it could be delivered very differently to 30 different players every year. So
yeah, brilliant. Carl, if there's coaches out there that are struggling with that relationship with players. You just said about there, like the sort of psychology side. There'll be coaches, and I'm sure you can think of people that are technically brilliant, programs in a great spot. They just can't get that relationship going with the players, or like you said, get them on a level that isn't just football gym, and know a little bit more about them and see these changes in behaviour. If someone's in a position like that, what would you add any sort of advice for them?
I always use an example. I've spoken to people just in general about this, and I always use the example of, I always use an exercise, for example, so a squat or a deadlift. Let's say sets and reps of 3 times 5, and the aim is strength for that day. The way I do it with, I could deliver that exact same sets, reps, and exercise in 4 or 5 different ways. So there's certain players that want to be, obviously, for example, a deadlift is very widely and commonly used. So a lot of players know what a deadlift is, especially a trap bar deadlift nowadays. A technically easier lift to coach than your conventional. But one player likes to be demonstrated to the T, all the cues, your textbook. When you go to university, exactly how you learn how to do this lift and how you learn how to coach it. Then players thrive off that. They want it. They want every single cue when they're lifting, when they're not, once they're resting. What's the feedback? Whether that's internal or external feedback, they want absolutely everything. Other players just want. Some players on the opposite end of the scale just want to walk in the gym. What am I doing, Carl? What weight am I doing? Some want to know exactly what weight they're doing. They don't even care. They just want, all right, I'm doing that weight. Have I done it before? Yeah. Okay. Bang. Lift it. Walk out. And then you got the ones in the middle that will come up to you and they'll ask you, right, we're doing this trap bar deadlift today, 3 times 5. Thanks, Carl. What weight did I do last time? Okay, thank you. And they will go off, not on their own because they're in the gym, but they'll go off on their own, they'll do it, and they'll rather just be left to it. That's 3 different examples I've gave you there. Some needs, and it may sound daft to some people, but they may need entertaining. So in between don't be afraid in between their lifts. Have a laugh with them. Talk about what they did the other evening, what film did they watch, what Netflix. And I think that's one of the biggest skills I've learned is that when the players want to talk about that, let's talk about it. Let's almost distract them from the next set. But then as soon as it's time to work, they're like, right, okay, let's go. Let's lift. What am I doing? Okay, bang. Put the weight down or whatever they're doing, exercise. And we'll go back to talking about the Idris Elba show that we watched last night. And some players don't want to talk about it. Some just don't want to talk to you. So it is really, one, not being offended. I've already said that. Don't be offended if players don't want to talk to you. Don't question that. Just, it's hard to build relationships at times in football because they can be there for 6 months on a loan. They can be there for a year on a loan. They can be there for a 5-year contract and some even 10, so you get to really know them. But it's trying to know them quickly. And then once you do know them, best practice, I mean, obviously, a lot of coaches will know as well that when you're organising sessions, you'll put certain players with certain players because they get the best out of them. Sometimes it's the opposite. You know that him and him aren't great together because they just mess about. Yeah. So actually, we put him with him because he concentrates. So all the stuff that we've all experienced probably in that time, or anybody who's maybe looking to get into the game, is them considerations can be the massive difference between a good session and a bad session, or a bad week and a good week, or a good season and a bad season. And it's just learning them small little soft skills that I could say could be the same program for the next 10 years, but each year I learn something different to get the players or keep the players engaged. So yeah, it's getting to know. I always say get to know the human, because I think using the word human makes most coaches and people realize they are humans. Footballers sometimes aren't seen as humans; they're seen as these robots that just should do everything perfect. They don't. So yeah, it's getting to know the human, and then coaching and managing that human, not the footballer, coaching and managing that human.
Well, if you had a new signing coming, Cal, like take now, for example, you've gone through a pre-season period, you got your squad together, you started the season, the lads are probably bonding at this point as well, becoming quite a tight-knit group, but then you get a new signing coming, someone that you don't know. Would you put it out to them and say, like, how do you like to work? Especially if you're someone a bit more experienced.
Yes, I think this links a little bit to what we will talk about, so I may as well jump onto that. So one of the biggest messages, so when I made a big change to how we prepare players, I actually sat down with the players and presented to them of what we're going to do and why. I won't talk all about it just right now, but one particular thing that you triggered there was it was an open and honest conversation, and I had a few buzzwords, if you like, or key words that I put on a slide, and was almost like, this is what I want as an S&C coach, having experienced many different types of players, like you said. I want ownership. So every single player has ownership of their program. Accountability, which kind of links, having that ownership allows you to stay accountable to yourself, but also the team around you. And one of the biggest ones, there was a few on there, but one of the biggest ones was communication. I really sold that to them, that communication is probably the most important one out of all of them. I've said it a few times now, I'm not a coach that gets offended. And I also know there's more than one way to skin a cat. If you don't like something, don't spend 6 weeks. I'm going to use deadlift again as an example because it's the simplest one to relate to for a lot of people. Some players, it hurts their back. But in simple terms, some players won't tell you for 6 weeks. You may not be with them at that moment in time when they're doing that lift because you're dealing with the other player at the other side of the room. And that's the reality of having 1 to 20 at times. But they will tell you 6 weeks later, can we go? I would cue maybe that progressive overload. Can we increase the load by 5 or 10 kilos today then? And they'll be like, yeah, do it. And then be like, oh, my back. I was like, oh, do you normally get that? I would then ask them, do you normally get that? Oh, yeah, I've had it from this. Well, why have you not communicated that? And a lot of players just believe, maybe from past experiences with different coaches or other clubs that they may have come from, they believe that I just got to do these exercises and that's whatever the coach writes on the board is what I must do. I don't believe that gets the best out of humans, as I said previous. If you want to apply a maximal strength exercise to a player, we all know there's more than one way. Then if they really, really, even with all the coaching cues in the world, and let's remember we have minimal time with these players. So sometimes it can't be purely just coaching the movement to best deadlift. Actually, we need to actually just get some maximal force out of this guy. So what else can we do? If they communicate that, let's do something else. And sometimes it's not even a physical issue where they're in pain or anything. They just don't like the exercise because they've heard somebody else has hurt themselves on it, or it doesn't look cool, or you don't always fully know. But if they just really, really don't get on with it, and I think that's the culture I've managed to build within the team that I work with, and even when players come in, I think they can feel it in the room, and when they're in sessions, that there's a lot of, Cal, what else can I do instead of this today? Sometimes it's just a day as well because I've got a little niggle from the game or whatever it is. And it's being open to that. And the best way for us coaches to plan with that is always have your gold standard and then have a progression, regression, and alternative, which I'll touch on in terms of the physical prep. But then you've always got ammo to change that, if you like. And sometimes it's actually just manipulating the exercise for that player and making it more efficient for them. I mean, at the moment we have a 6'9" player, and he's left now actually. But I think our smallest player is 5'7". So them doing the same exercise doesn't look the same. Simple as that. It is the same exercise, but it doesn't look the same. So it's thinking about that before you deliver your session as well. What are they in the same group? Because if they are, that become a problem when both lifting together, kind of thing. So yeah, I'm going off on a tangent there a little bit, but yeah.
No, I think it's really important that, because the whole art of being approachable, flexible, being able to adapt is really key for players, isn't it? But a lot of coaches will probably think they've got the ability to adapt a session, or you'd like to think so. But I suppose the real key bit is the players being, like you said, open and willing to come forward and go, Cal, this is what's been going on. Like, can we work together on it? And it's probably that's the missing link for a lot of people, isn't it? Because they won't get to that stage.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things as well is obviously when you're coaching something and you can see that you've learned all these different things, whether it's from podcasts, watching podcasts, whether it's seminars, going at university, or wherever you've learned certain exercises and cues, etc. It might look textbook, but what you see and what they feel is two different things. So I always give them feedback from me. I give them external feedback sometimes with videos. Even with them too, if I say, well, that looked really good, and look, it looks really good, they may still say, no, but it hurts this, Cal. Oh, yeah. Okay. And that's where the real transparent, like, there's almost three parts to that that I've just described, and you have to listen to them a lot of the time. And I think I've got to a point where players are honest with me as well. They won't just say it for the saying its sake. Some will. I'm not naive to that, but it's just it's being approachable, and then it's backing that up. So obviously, as we all know, if you're going to say something, you have to back it up. And if you say that you're approachable and you're adaptable and you don't take offense to having to change something, then back it up and have that plan. Because if you back it up on that first time they ask, that could almost buy in that could almost get their buy-in for the rest of the season and the rest of the year, and maybe the rest of the contract. So it's trivial little things, but it can help your own day-to-day and your own coaching career, that it'll make it easy for you if you're more open-minded. And that, again, I'm saying that as if like it's easy. I didn't start like that. I started thinking that everything has to be textbook, and what I learned at university and or where conferences or whatever I've been on. But actually, it's just skills that this is where I never understood what experience was until I got experience. And I now understand that experience allows you to adapt to these things. So it's not something to be, if you're maybe just starting in the game or sport, or even have done a year or two and you're wondering, it's not anything to be caught up on or worried about. It's just learning them little soft skills. And you'll get your own as well. There'll be stuff that I've not even mentioned or even experienced myself that other people will have. But once you feel you've got to where you want to in terms of what you've learned, and I don't ever feel like I've learned everything, but it's then really honing on that coaching side of things and just getting to know your players in your way and ways that people talk about and experience too.
Definitely. I want to flick back to the sort of Premier League Championship comparisons, and more, I suppose, sort of scheduling of games. So not necessarily just those leagues, but how that impacts the strength work that you're doing with players, where you get the work in, where microdosing comes into it, what that actually even looks like on a sort of week-to-week basis.
Okay, so I'll paint a little story, if you like, or a picture. So prior to this period of time, the last 3 years, what we used to call, and it also makes sense soon, we used to call pre-activation or pre-act, and then gym. They were two separate things. And actually IRM, which was injury risk management. So there's 3 different pockets there prior to how we do it now in terms of the microdosing. So the players would every single day, no matter what coach it was at that time, they would pre-act prior to training. And that generally looked like foam rolling, banded activation, mobility. And sometimes that might be all of them in one session, but generally probably spread across foam rolling on a Monday, band activation on a Tuesday. This is just an example. Mobility on a Wednesday, and then maybe a day before a game was all 3 of them. And then they would do a gym session or strength session in the PM on a Tuesday, generally in both periodizations, English or European. And that would be it. But then if I take it back to one particular experience under David Wagner, we would do a gym on a Tuesday morning with some high-speed running, and then the technical or coaching session on the pitch would be in the PM. Now, the pros and cons of doing AM and PM gym, or AM or PM gym, is when we had that experience of doing AM gym, players would save themselves knowing they have training in the afternoon. They wouldn't tell you. Some would straight up say, "I'm saving myself this afternoon. I'm going to keep it at this weight," or whatever it is. And some you just know are holding back because they've got a technical session in the afternoon. The problem with that was, in reflection and at the time, was you've got one moment with them in a week, and they're holding back on it. So you're not actually getting what you want out of it anyway. So that 100% session that we had on a Tuesday morning then became arbitrary numbers, 60, 70%, maybe even 50. So you're missing out on a massive chunk. And then obviously with the other challenge of the championship having double game weeks, so it could be 3 weeks before you see the gym again. And then obviously, I was delivering a lot of the pre-activation and less of the gym at the time. I was more support, if you like. And that enabled me to reflect. I'm a very reflective coach. It enabled me to reflect a lot. And there was just something just wasn't right. It obviously kept going on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years at the start of my time here. And it actually came when there was a big change. The head of physical performance at the time had left, and one of the physical performance coaches that was here in our department, if you like, was then promoted to be the head of physical performance. And he challenged us to have, well, not challenged us, sorry, he asked us to review the prep and the strength work, if you like, with the players and what we thought of it. Because it got to a point where, and again, this is honest answers, it was almost like a Russian roulette of who would take prep in our department, because it was in the COVID years, actually. I remember it really, really clearly. That was in the tent, taking it a lock. We had a big marquee for the COVID restrictions, and players will come in, and come in at the time that they've been given, and you'd see players plodding on the bike, not really pedaling. Would then coach and lead the session. So someone like myself or somebody else would stand at the front and coach and lead an activation session with the entire group, everyone doing exactly the same thing. And every day, it was, like I said, it was almost a bit of a running thing in our department, who's going to take the prep today, because no one really led it at the time. And yeah, it got to a point where people just didn't want to do it. It's being really blunt and honest as that. People didn't want to do it. So then at the end of that season, I think it was the 1920 season, the big change had been made in the department. He'd stepped up to be head of physical performance, and he challenged me and I'm going to say friend, not colleague, Dan, to review the entire indoor condition, if you like, in the club. We spent the off season doing it, and it just, something had to change. We had to, how can we get more work into the players? How can we ensure they're getting the work in when they are actually doing it? How can we actually get a buy-in, if you like? And I know buy-in is quite a buzzword, and it's used quite a lot, quite cliche. And he said, well, I mean, we asked him this because we thought we was both struggling at the time, thinking, how can we do this? And we actually asked him, he said, "What, have you ever asked the players?" And then we was like, well, no. Because obviously I've always believed that we're the coaches, we do it. Have you asked the players? And okay, yeah. So what we actually did before the end of the season was we sat down with every single individual in a room, just me and the player, and Dan had a group of players as well. We had a set amount of, I think it was 4 or 5 questions, and we just asked them about pre-activation. What's your thoughts? Like, one of the questions was just open, honest thoughts. Then another one was, what have you done in the past? Another one was, what would you do differently? And another one was, what would you like to do? Something like that. And it just allowed us to get so many different views. So we had young pros that were transitioning from the B team to the first team within them questions. 23, 24-year-old pros that obviously kind of just at the start, but are quite regulars in the first team. And then we had the senior players as well. And then on top of that, you've got, within that mix of all them, you've got players coming from different clubs, experiences, different cultures, that sort of stuff. So we got so many different answers. One of the most common ones that came up, and when I describe the way we do prep, it'll make sense, was they want to do what they want to do, put it simply. Obviously, we can't just let them loose for half an hour and every single day and not get the work that we think is needed. But that came up a lot, is that we'd like time, basically, to do what we like to do. Because they come into they used to come into prep 10 o'clock till 10:30. You've been told what to do. You're on the bike for 10 minutes. That group's on the bike. That group's with me. Swap over, blah, blah, blah. And that was it. But never got time to themselves. Unless they was really proactive and they got in the gym first. But sometimes there was stuff, meetings and strappings and the breakfast first. There was just no time for that sometimes. So that was the biggest one. So then that prompted us within our planning that we would go down. Me and Dan spoke a lot about microdosing and that we need to do it. But how do we get it in? Players don't want to wait around till 1 o'clock every single day. That then prompted, well, actually, can we do it pre-training? Well, we've never done that before, which was a battle mentally to think, oh, can we do this? Because it's a massive change for the players. We've not experienced it anywhere else coaching it. And we've not heard any of the players say that's something they would like to do. So it was almost like, just go with it. Luckily, we had a director of football at the time that was very autonomous and gave us a lot of autonomy and freedom to express ourselves. And so we went with it, and we came up with, we actually got rid, again, psychology, we got rid of the word pre-act because it was just associated with what it was. And it's now called prep or physical. We actually prompted it to be physical preparation, but it's now just called prep. I know it seems such a trivial thing, but it actually has been a massive thing. And at the start, I actually fined players for using the word pre-act. So yeah, and it helped. So then off the back of that, the most effective change I did was take away the word gym or strength and actually give every single day. So not only do we microdose, every single day has a theme, and that theme has a name. So the players now use them themes and them names when they're coming in, and they know on a match day -4 we're doing robustness. So they know exactly why they're in the gym and what they're doing it for. And I use this arbitrary number again that I believe prior we had like a 30%, 70% split in terms of application and non-application. And I do believe that has flipped. I'd even be confident enough to say 80-20, but yeah, we use a themed approach for microdosing every single day, and players now know when certain sessions are. So they know the day before a game we're doing a primer, and it's called PFW, and the players know. So when we're away, sometimes if it's a really long distance fixture and they're not training here, we're training somewhere else, they'll be asking, well, where are we going to do PFW? They know. So to get to a point where players really wasn't buying into the process when they was actually in the moment, so when they're not in the moment and asking where they're doing it, for me has been the biggest, most fulfilling part of my career, if you like, which again seems really trivial, but it's increased engagement, it's increased buy-in, and through the testing that we conduct is actually increased physical performance as well as maintained it. So a lot of first team coaches' aims are to maintain and make sure that players are crossing the line every single Saturday. But again, where my philosophy has changed is actually, can we maintain, but can we actually make players better as well? And that has been proven a number of times since the change anyway.
I think where you're talking about themes and names, it's really important, but especially really important when you're making a change, like you said, where you're like reframing something, isn't it? Yeah. You're getting out with the old and in with the new. And the whole pre-act would have been set into players' routines, wouldn't it? So to continue using something like that, but change what you're doing would have probably been quite confusing, even though we know it's probably similar work to a point.
Yeah,
I think it's a really important point, isn't it? That if you're going to make a change, it needs reframing for players.
Yeah, it was really important to me that the players, when they came into the gym, was there for a purpose, and it was there to make change and adapt it. And what's actually happened is we didn't take away what they used to do. So we didn't take away the bike, and we haven't taken away, the bike, the foam rolling, or the mobility, but we've given that to them.
Yeah.
We've given that to them. So when they come into the gym every day, depends on the day and the theme, they'll have a certain period of time every single day. We call it self-prep, to have time to themselves. Some will sit on a bike for 10 minutes if they've got 10 minutes. They feel that's what they want to do. Some will sit on a bike for 5 minutes, and obviously the science may say that it's not long enough, or it's too long, or are they doing it right intensity? But one of the most important things I realize is that sometimes it doesn't go out the window, science, but what's the point in science if you're only getting 20% of buy-in? I'd rather get 80% or 70% of the right thing, but 100% of the compliance to it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So if we believe, sorry about that, if we believe 8 minutes or 12 minutes, depending on what research you read, is enough to get the heart rate, thermogenesis, etc., is the right thing, but actually only doing 5 minutes, are they doing the right thing? Well, actually, at least doing 5 minutes at the right intensity rather than 5-minute plod that they used to do, because they've got ownership of it. So I spoke about that. I touched on that a little bit earlier. They've got ownership of it. And because they have ownership of it, the players come in for that first 10 minutes, and you very rarely see players messing about and not doing anything, because they have this sense of, I'm owning this and this is what I've chose to do. So some players will walk straight in, they'll get on the bands and they'll do some glute activation, hip, quad, whatever they want to focus on. And then they know on the board, right, this is my session. And then we try and individualize that as much as possible. And when I say much as possible, there's a few things there. So there's the facilities. So the facilities is one, and the space. You can't give every single player 20, say there's 20 players. If we're training with 20 players, you can't have 20 different exercises going off for the same outcome. And a lot of the time, you don't need to do that, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel for certain stuff. But I touched on it earlier a little bit. So we have a gold standard exercise for each. So we have a template for each day. A gold standard exercise, a progression, a regression, and an alternative. And that's generally how it works. But sometimes every single player might do the same exercise because actually it's just a filler, if you like, a low intense exercise that's working on. Let's just use, I don't know, low intense plyometric exercise like box pogos, where we're just getting that rhythm, we're getting the contacts, and we're just getting them prepared for sprinting outside. There's no point in reinventing the wheel and getting one player doing a different variation of pogos when that's all we want out of that exercise. So players recognise that, but then they recognise that on some of the key lifts or the key exercises, there's big differences based off testing. So some players may be working on maximal strength, so they may be on, I'm going to use the trap bar again. They may be on a heavy trap bar lift of 3x3 that day. And another group of players may be on a banded variation because they're working on strength speed based off the testing. This is what they want, blah, blah, blah. So there's an element of individualization in a generic setting, if that makes sense. And then not only that, certain players may be training with the first team, so the 20 training. And it's match day -4 for them, but some may have a game on the Wednesday with the reserve team because they need minutes. They won't just do robustness because that's what they're doing. They'll do the PFW or the match day -1 primer. And that's, again, another way of individualizing their program within the week. So it's individualization within the session, obviously, but it's also individualization within their own personal meso and microcycles. And that's one thing that the themed sessions really allows us to do. So if I'm not here for whatever reason, whether that's because I'm in a different room, in a different building, or actually not even in on the day, other coaches can just deliver that session because they know, oh, Cal's left this handover, we're doing robustness, and this is the robustness session for these players, and these players are doing the primer session. So there's a lot of individualization, a lot of planning that goes into it. And like I say, the biggest win is the players use that language. That is the biggest win. The players use the language, and if you've got the players using the language, in my opinion, you're onto a real winner.
They use it because they understand it. It makes complete sense to them, doesn't it? Whereas if you start to get, yeah, true. If you start to get too technical, though, that's when you've not got that, isn't it? That players that don't understand it, and the probably interest and focus is going to be reduced on that what they're actually doing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to give a real example, so a 1 game week on a match day -5. So let's just use a standard week, Saturday to Saturday games. +1 is off generally, or recovery, depending on the manager's choice. And then +2, or the Monday, if you like, +2 -5, as we call it, is a recovery day. In my remit, it's called Your Needs. So on that day, there's certain players that have played 90 2 days ago, so they're match day +2, but there's players that have played very minimal minutes or none at all, or not in the squad. So they're -5. And their needs is completely different to the needs of the players that played. So that day is your needs in terms of when you enter the gym room, if you like. And that generally, obviously, recovery for the starters or the 60+ minutes. Anyone less than 30 or not in the squad will do so either obviously grass-based training work in terms of their volume intensity will be higher. And then anything indoor, they may do what we call TLC. So that is a session where they're working on a lot of corrective stuff, mobility, trunk. So very low intense remedial work that is beneficial, obviously. But as soon as they know that it's TLC, they know it's not a hard session. It's some really important small nuggets that they need to work on. And that was typically in the past called IRM, so injury risk management. And the buy-in then was very poor, whereas now it's almost like that session. Again, that's one of the biggest wins for me. That session there, where they're not doing particularly hard stuff, but they are giving that detail, that time, I can't think of the word right now, but they're putting the effort into these smaller things because they know that they're also small nuggets that do count. Match day -4, so typically our working day would be, now this is under the current regime where we do a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, and then Thursday, Friday work days. So a Tuesday was what we call robustness, which generally is the work towards tissue tolerance and maximal strength and what, if you like, a lot of people understand the word robustness. So staying injury free, although the entire program is obviously designed for injury risk management, but so they know when they're coming in that on robustness day, they've got a heavy lift to do. They've got some isometric work to do. So that's the type of work they know they're coming in to do. They've got some eccentric work to do on the hamstrings now. So they know like it's particularly the harder day. And straight away, as soon as they hear robustness, they know. Because you hear players going, oh, not robustness, because they know it's hard. All the ones that are hungry and eager are like, yes, I'm going to beat my PR this week or whatever. So, and then I think the most simple one, so on a Thursday now, is typically a power session, if you like, in terms of technical terms, but it's called Run Fast. I'll be honest with you, when I was coming up with the names, I wasn't sure what to call this session, but the whole purpose of it was power, and the players relate to power is running fast. So the players know when they're coming in on a run fast day, there's contacts, there's plyometrics, there's ballistic work, there's some speed strength work, and they know that they're moving certain weights, light weights, quick or moderate weights as quick as possible. We use gym aware within robustness and run fast, so there's a lot of competition, as well as obviously working towards the targets of the zones that they need to be in. But so that's one thing I've implemented as well, is a lot of more competition. So there's leaderboards in the gym. There's, like I say, external feedback with the gym aware, so we use gym aware, and the players know that, oh, what did I get last week, Cal? It's on the board. I got this, and that part of it is again elevated it as well. So they're doing all this before training, with the microdosing approach, and they know that they've got 1 or 2 lifts on a robustness and run fast day that are fatiguing, if you like. The rest is remedial filler work. That is important, but they know it's, less intense. And then one of the biggest things that when we was planning the change was implementing primer work, because there was a few players on the feedback that we got when we asked them about what they'd like to do. There was a few of the European players that, not particularly European, but had played in Europe, had experience doing primer style work, match day -1, day before a game. Something that we did implement into pre-activation prior a little bit with some explosive like box jumps and stuff like that, but not a full session, if that makes sense. So it was something that I was a little bit apprehensive about whether it would work and we get the buy-in with, especially the senior lads that have done the same thing for the last 10 years, for example. But that's probably the one session now that I would say has got the biggest buy-in, the biggest application, adherence. Players turn up, they want to, and there's a lot of competition in them sessions. So I'm trying to raise that arousal, if you like, in terms of competition. They've got a game the next day. So I use things like, I actually have now, because it's the smallest session of the week from me, so they get more time to themselves. So as they go throughout the week, their self-prep gets longer. So 5 to 10 minutes on a robustness day compared to on a match day -1, they get up to 15 minutes on to themselves. And then it's 15 minutes with me rather than a 5-25 split, if that makes sense. So yeah, they get, and within that self-prep time, I set a little mental challenge of like quizzes of like, who am I and footballers, and this, rather than them, the reason for that as well, I actually got the idea from one of the kit men, so I can't take full credit, but he asked me, who am I? And I was like, you know what? And it was the day before a game, I thought, this is excellent. And two of the lads started trying to guess it, and I was like, this is excellent. It takes their focus away from the game, which you could argue, but they have meetings for that. They go into tactical meetings with the coaches for that. While they're with me, I want them to not think about that and get them self-ready physically and mentally. So not only do I have competition with the exercises, like I say, in that self-prep time, while they're biking, while they're foam rolling, they're all discussing this, who am I, or whatever it is. And that's something that they're getting. The lads know on match day -1, Cal, where's the quiz? Because sometimes I might not have it up in time. So they're like, where's the quiz? And that's just like a small, what's it called? One of the soft skills that I was talking about earlier that I think is really beneficial is trying to connect with the players, and it allows them to banter with me. And if I've done something wrong on the question, they're like, "Oh, Cal, you got that wrong. That's your fault." And it allows you to build that rapport with the players as well, and again get more buy-in. Don't be a robot is probably my biggest advice in terms of coaching. But yeah, so throughout the week, there's just themes. Players know when they're doing stuff, and that is 100% the biggest win. And players ask about the scores, no board, jumps, whatever it may be, gym aware lifts, whatever it may be. and it's such a much more fulfilling experience as a coach than what we did prior, if you like. So all round for the players and for staff, it's a much better environment as well. So
that's a brilliant breakdown, mate. And I apologise for getting your title wrong at the start, which should have been psychologist and quizmaster.
yeah. Yeah, I'm going to ask for that to be changed, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely. No, that was awesome, mate. I think there was loads in there for people to take away. Just on how things have transitioned as well for your time at the club and the lessons as well. Because I think there's a big difference, isn't there, behind the education that you pick up across your career and then making it really applied, and the lessons in terms of working with individuals, which is obviously what you're describing there. That's just through experience, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of just wrapping things up, I normally finish these episodes with the quick fire questions at the end.
Okay.
So we'll go through these now. Nothing too hard for you to tackle. No tough quiz questions like you're going to come up with.
When I listen to these, I'm always like, oh, really intrigued. Really inspiring. So I'm now putting pressure on myself. So there you go.
Just give us some of the main influences on your career so far.
We're talking names or experiences?
Yeah, names.
I get pressure here again. So I mentioned one, kind of without mentioning his name, in terms of the guy that asked me to ask the players, and I know again it's a trivial thing, what they want. It was such it's a big moment because it's work that's still happening now, and it's been happening for the last 3 years because of that question. And not only that, I still talk to him outside of this remit, if you like, or the job. But Callum Walsh has been one of the biggest influences on my career. And we actually didn't see eye to eye at first, I'll be really honest. Maybe it was the same name, I don't know what it was. I remember having a little fallout on the sauna once, but he's definitely he's very innovative. Anyone obviously that's listened to his podcast that he's been on and spoke to him and maybe been to conferences and even experienced working with him, because he's a journeyman. I don't think he'll mind me saying that, but he has every story in the world for you. But because of that though, is so much insight and experience that he's had. It allows you to think about things not just black and white, but also orange, green, yellow, and purple. So because of that experience working with him, I like to implement a lot of things, or try to, maybe not as good as him, but try to implement a lot of not only my coaching, but my approaches to myself as a coach, and how I reflect and how I move forward and how I change, and not being afraid of change, because that's the biggest message from that conversation we had. Don't be afraid to try something.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I was prior. It definitely wouldn't be right of me not to mention Dr. John Iger. So obviously a big name in this industry, if you like. He's one of a very different experience to Callum Walsh. But definitely the best way to describe it is he taught me all the fundamentals, I believe, that I still have now. So organizational skills, how to structure things, how to structure my days, weeks, sessions, that sort of stuff that is really vital to making sure when you're on the gym floor you perform at your best. So yeah, definitely John Iger. And then I have to mention Dan Hughes, that I work with now still, because he's the reason I'm in the game, because he gave me the role as an intern. So but again, Dan, very different experiences. He has, his philosophy is he's quite a biomechanical man, a movement guy. And again, within the industry of S&C, as we know, there's different elements and segments to it. So I've learned a lot from him, and it's allowed me to, I'd say my strength is strength and power. But then to be able to implement this work and learn the things off him as well, and collaborate the way we do, it's been really, experience and influential. So I've only mentioned actual physical coaches, but there's obviously technical coaches as well that I've worked with that have influenced the way I work. And the psychologist has been one. So Matt Toms I work with, and he again is a reason why I do the way I do prep now. So he's the man, not behind me, but in terms of me, the man behind me, if you like that, or my mind behind me, because any ideas I had, I would always run by him and how would I implement this? Why don't you try this, this, and this? So again, something away from him as an individual, but a psychologist within a coaching setting and within a team, I think really vital. Something that when I first started again, I would not have even thought of. Obviously, I know it's a lot more prevalent nowadays within the sporting industry, not just football. It's a massive, massive role, in my opinion. It's the mind behind the mind, if you like. And yeah, a very big influence on my career, definitely.
I think you might have already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What would you say is your number one strength as a practitioner?
Oh, trying to think. I know what I'm going to say, but how I word it. Being approachable, actually, as simple as that. One of my biggest strengths is being approachable and being relatable. And I don't just mean as a person, but just even as a coach. I'm a coach that I have the philosophy of I try everything I coach. I train myself for my own health, obviously, but I actually try things for the purpose of coaching as well and how it should feel, etc. Blah blah. So not only do I believe I'm relatable as a person to a lot of the lads, but and coaches as well, but also I like to be able to relate to them physically. So when I'm asking them to do something, I know I haven't just read how to coach it in coaching cues, but I actually know how it feels as well. So that's one of my biggest philosophies, and I will always carry that with me. I don't think that means everyone has to be like that, but for me, it really helps me understand what I'm coaching as well. So yeah, I think that's probably my biggest strength, and organisation. To tick a CV box there, you like. Organizational skills, definitely. I have everything that I deliver planned to the T. Like I say, with as small as gold standard, regressions, progressions, alternatives. I mean, that seems such a simple thing, but it helps a lot with always having something, so you're not put on your toes and fall on your feet, kind of thing. So, yeah, organizational as well.
If you were able to chat to Callum before you got the opportunity at Huddersfield, so coming out fresh from a degree, you had to give that Callum back then some career advice, what would it be?
I don't know if this answers the question, but so I actually in terms of my career, I came straight out of undergrad of exercise science straight into this role, if you like, that I spoke about at the start. And it wasn't for 7 years until I actually studied my master's degree. Now, obviously, there's certain points where I spoke to a lot of coaches in the industry, and they've all got the masters and started the PhDs, and they was younger than me. I'm 30 now. I started when I was 20, technically. And I didn't start studying for my master's until I was 27. And again, Callum Walsh, he did the opposite. He did his degree early. He did his master's degree almost straight after his undergrad. And we spoke about this a lot because I always question whether actually does that make me not a better coach because I've not done my master's. Obviously, having done my master's, and when I went into the master's, I felt really old. I'll be honest. Because a lot of undergrads that have gone straight into the master's degree. And what was really unique for me at that point was everything I was learning, I was able to relate, and it almost helped me. It helped me look like I knew what I was on about. To be fair, which I'm not sure is the case all the time, but it was just a really unique way because it allowed me to go in, learn the theory stuff, but then apply it. Not just in the actual lectures and sessions, but also come back and apply it. Whereas obviously what I experienced talking to the other students on the course was, well, they've just come out of their undergrads and they have gone straight into the masters, but don't have any experience working in any field of S&C, if you like. That's what I was studying. And it was really hard for them to apply and relate anything. I don't think there's one way that's better than the other, but I do really appreciate, because I didn't appreciate the way I did it, whereas now after doing it, I do. In fact, what I learned at uni largely was definitely implemented into what I do now with physical prep and the microdosing, because the course was Paul Comfort and Matt Cuthbert, who did the microdosing recent paper, etc. With Paul Comfort, etc. So there's a lot of that stuff I learned on that course that is the reason I do the way I do prep now. So I do believe that there's sometimes a lot of people that go into study degrees, whether they're in work at the same time, don't always use what they learn because they haven't got the opportunity to, or they haven't got the freedom to, or the autonomy to. Whereas I went through a really unique experience of being able to learn it and just come in and do it and try it. And it's still like to this day, I use a lot of stuff I've learned. So that's been a really unique way. And like I said, I used to question work because I haven't studied for 7 years. Does that mean I'm behind? Or obviously I did a lot of my own reading and learning, etc. But I didn't have the official title, if you like, of Master of Science in Strength Conditioning. I have now. But yeah, I don't, like I say, if anyone listens to this for advice, I wouldn't say there's a right way or a wrong way, but definitely don't discourage doing 5 or 6 years experience if you're lucky enough to be able to get it and then doing a degree. Because experience is definitely as important as getting a degree. So I now understand why they always ask for X amount of experience in job applications. So yeah, I'd say that's probably my biggest point. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. Really good point. I think it's true for a lot of people as well, isn't it? Because you see, I'm sure people even relating back to degrees, which is a hard one because you need that to get opportunities. But if you're to do degrees, once you've got experience, you relate to a lot of stuff that you cover a lot more because you know why you're covering it, don't you? But then, like I said, it's hard because you need that. You do need that first as the tick box to get the opportunity. So no, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, it's difficult for, like I say, for students to. I've received emails from people that are asking for experience, and I'd love to be able to say, because if I was that, I did it when I was a student, and I didn't get replies. I did get replies, so I do try and make sure I reply to all of them, and other colleagues get the same thing. And yeah, it's difficult to give advice sometimes because the best advice is get experience, but getting experience isn't that easy. So
yeah.
So yeah.
Final thing, mate. Final question. CPD. How do you approach that now? Just continuing your development as a practitioner. How do you go about
that? So as a practitioner, again, obviously one of the common requirements to have a recognised accreditation, if you like. So I'm an NSCA member, CSCS. As part of that, you have to continue that. You have to do CPD. So one of my most recent CPD is actually my master's, as it happens. A lot of so within that there's certain CPDs that are worth more credits, etc. And so one of my smaller credit ways of doing CPD is podcasts. If I'm being really honest, podcasts I learn a lot from. I try to listen to for and against. If I see titles that are for and against, so one that says this is excellent and one that says this is not, I try to listen to both. So there's pros and cons, and I can make my own informed decision based off either experience or knowledge or what they've said. So I do a lot of that. I'm not the best reader. I'll be really honest. I've never been the best reader. I don't mean I can't read. I mean, I struggle with reading a lot of information, taking it in. So the best way, I like probably most people, I read abstracts. If I like the paper, I read the rest of it. But I also recently I read a lot of books in terms of S&C, but also psychology. Like I say, I think one of the biggest things for S&C in sport is digging into psychology and how you can make the most of that. Because, like I've already said, without that psychological advantage of being able to work in that way, all the knowledge of S&C you've got may go to waste. So yeah, I read a lot of books, and then trying to get on as many courses as possible. To be honest with you, it always depends on, if I'm being really honest, funding and stuff like that. But yeah, I try to get on as much courses as I can, whether that's workshops or just conferences or and networking as well. One of my favorite social media is LinkedIn, actually. Because there's so much research out there, and everyone that conducts the research, everyone's on there. It's such a great environment, so you can pick up papers about this and this, and people sharing this. So yeah, I actually use LinkedIn as a source of a channel for CPD, if you like. And then also, we actually went through a period of time where we'd go into different sports clubs as well. So having that link to Huddersfield Giants, we did that a couple of times. That was a few years ago now. We was fortunate enough to have quite a close-knit link with, obviously, them using the same stadium, etc. So yeah, going into different sports clubs is something that we've utilised quite a lot here. If you've got contacts, or if you've got, for example, it was actually our psychologist at the time, he worked with, because he was a consultant, he worked with Exeter, Leicester Tigers, Exeter Chiefs, sorry, Leicester Tigers, little bits in Manchester City and stuff. So he had links for us to be able to, whether it was conversate over something like this, or even social media or phone, or actually go in and actually experience a day, a working day, if you like. So that sort of stuff was massively beneficial, because it just allows you to see what other teams or sports and clubs are doing and not doing. That's really, for me, one of the most valuable ones I've probably done. And yeah, and then also keeping up with all the other accreditations. Obviously, I'm gonna be now, after my masters, working more towards other accreditations as well, and not ticking them off, because that sounds like I'm ticking a box, but you know what I mean. Yeah, making sure that I'm having a different avenues of information from different sources.
Class.
Oh, and
Cal,
also,
mate.
Sorry, read stuff outside of fitness.
Yeah,
that's great advice that I can give, because it opens your mind to thinking differently. And don't think that to become a better coach, so you have to read strength or fitness coach things to become a better coach.
Yeah, I think that ties in with a lot of stuff you've covered in terms of that's where players are truly going to buy in as well, isn't it? Having a bit more about yourself than just strictly sets, reps, exercises.
And watch Netflix. All the lads watch Netflix, so there you go, got something to talk about.
100%.
I'm not a Netflix watcher, to be fair, but there's certain programs that have been pushed on, and yeah, it gives you something to talk about, and it allows players to buy into you. So
yeah, it becomes relatable, doesn't it? 100%.
Yeah.
Cal, you just mentioned LinkedIn. If people want to reach out to you, would that be the place you'd send them, or is there anywhere else?
I'd say LinkedIn. I think that's the platform I use that's work related. If I'm honest, I'm not a massive fan of social media away from that, to be fair. But if anything related to this, I would say LinkedIn. Yeah.
Class. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, mate. That's been quality, and we'll definitely get you on again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for the experience as well. Like I say, first one as such. So
first of many, mate. First of many.
Thank you.